Good evening, everyone. As people are joining, I'd like to welcome you. My name is Elizabeth Lawson, and I'm here on representing Safer West County, your host. And I'm very happy to say that this presentation will be given in both English and Spanish. And I'm going to let our interpreters give you some information about how to get connected appropriately.
Muy buenas noches, le damos la bienvenida a la presentación de hoy. Estamos por iniciar la función de interpretación, todavía no se ha iniciado. Al terminar este anuncio, lanzarán la función. Entonces, cuando inicien la función, usted va a encontrar un icono de globo en la parte de abajo de su pantalla si usted está en su computadora. Le va a dar clic a ese globito y de ahí selecciona el canal de español. Si usted está en su teléfono celular o en una tableta, encontrará la función de interpretación en los tres puntitos al lado de la pantalla y de ahí selecciona español. Y ahora al concluir este mensaje se lanzará la función. Thank you.
Welcome to this evening's presentation on resilient landscaping and gardening in the defensible space zone. I'm Elizabeth Lawson. I'm from Safer West County, and I am also a gardener, so I'm very excited about this presentation. Safer West County is a nonprofit organization working in West County to connect people and resources to build a more resilient community, and we are building resilience in our forest waterways and our communities. And we work on collaboration as our model, and this is a part of our collaborative effort to get the information out about how to make our landscape defensible. I am also going to put some information in the chat about a current grant that we have for 4 locations in West County. We're hoping that we'll be able to give more grants in more areas of West County, but right now there's 4 locations. So I'll put that information in the chat. And right now I'd like to turn over to Ellie Inslee of the Resilient Landscape Coalition to talk about this evening's presentation. Welcome. I hope you're as excited as I am for this presentation.
Thank you, and I hope you all can hear me. I'm Ellie Inslee, and I'm really delighted that you're here today joining us. Looks like we have so far at least 30 people, a really good number. This workshop, Resilient Landscaping Gardening in the Defensible Space Zone, is sponsored by Safer West County, of course, and I really want to thank Elizabeth Lawson and Amy Beilharz, who have really championed the work we've been doing for the last several years. So much so that I am now on the Safer West County Education Committee. They pulled me in, and I'm delighted to be part of the community. So this workshop was created specifically for the West County community, although the wider Sonoma County was also invited. And I'd like to mention that we have an additional subtitle that's not showing on the screen today, which is Garden as if Life Depends on It, which is a quote from Doug Tallamy, who's an entomologist and author who wrote the book Bringing Nature Home. He's actually become prominent lately because he's been promoting the idea of supporting habitat in our home landscapes because our own lives are so inextricably connected to the natural world around us. And you'll see on the screen, we are defining resilient as biodiverse, drought resistant, fire-wise, and beautiful. So you can expect all of those topics to be covered today. I'm going to be the first of 3 panelists, and but before I go any further, I want to mention that this is a webinar, so you won't have access to the chat or audio or video, but we'd really love to have you put your questions in the Q&A box, and please do, because we really hope to have a lively conversation at the end. Oh, and also we will be sending out the recording. This is going to be recorded, and we will send that recording to everybody who's registered. The Resilient Landscapes Coalition was formed about 5 years ago when these 4 members that you see here, Sonoma Ecology Center, Habitat Corridor Project, UC Master Gardener Program of Sonoma County, and Fire Safe Sonoma got together to provide education and other resources to help landowners with their defensible space. And our work actually began on Bennett Ridge, which is that ridge that runs between Sonoma Valley and Santa Rosa. And there's a community there that's a Firewise community, and 70 of the 90 homes that on that ridge burned in 2017 in the Nuns Fire. So some of the landowners in 2019 were interested in helping their neighbors do landscaping that was both defensible and had habitat in mind. So they asked us to do a presentation, and that's when our workshops were born. We did it voluntarily and for about a year, and then we got funding from Sonoma County Vegetation Management Program. So this is brought to you by Sonoma County and their Vegetation Management Program. We've now gotten 2 grants from them, which has been terrific. I want to mention that this information we're providing is science-based. So UC Cooperative Extension provides invaluable information that we update our workshops with on a regular basis. April Owens of the Habitat Corridor Project is also on the board of the California Native Plant Society and brings a lot of expertise on ecology and habitat, as do the folks at the Sonoma Ecology Center. And you can see the whole cast of characters on the list there. Roberta McIntyre, Fire Safe Sonoma, has been our champion from the beginning, and she has offered a tremendous amount of information on the subject, as well as help with funding. And we've done this in partnership with the Sonoma Fire Prevention Division and CAL FIRE and local fire departments. So we pretty much cover all the bases. And we've created this website. You can find it at resilientlandscapescoalition.org. There's a tremendous amount of valuable information in each one of these tabs. We always tell people to start at the house and work out. Today, we're just going to be talking about the landscape and the plants. So information about home hardening is available on our website, and also information about the surrounding wildlands. So if you have property that goes beyond the 100 feet of defensible space, you can find information here as well. And I'm here to promote a new website that's being formed, also sponsored through the Resilient Landscapes Coalition, called Tending the Land, which is looking at beyond the 100 feet. And so tune in May 2024 at tendingtheland.org. So the agenda for today, I'm going to be speaking for about 20 minutes about fire ecology, fire context, ecology, and sustainability. Mimi Enright, who's the program manager for UC Master Gardeners, is going to be speaking about design and maintenance principles, and April will be talking about beautiful landscape design and planting opportunities. And then we'll have time for Q&A. Now, many of us live in this area because of its beauty. We're drawn to the attractive mosaic of forests and green space, the variety of plant communities and landforms, and of course, the beautiful weather. Plant communities in Sonoma County include, and what you see here is oak woodlands and oak savanna, grasslands. There's also chaparral, both coastal and interior, and mixed evergreen and coniferous forests, which you have quite a lot of in West County. It's heavily weighted towards that, as well as riparian or streamside forests. And we're coming to understand the complexity of this landscape, which has been tended for thousands of years by native peoples, using fire as a tool to improve hunting, acorn harvest, and to promote desirable stands of plants for food and fiber. And these practices resulted in resilient landscapes where low intensity frequent fire was present. At a minimum, 4.5 million acres were burned annually in California. And you can contrast that with a few years ago, we had 4 million acres burned in California catastrophically. You know, the entire forests were burned and destroyed, and so were entire communities, but those were high intensity fires. because previously the low intensity fires prevented buildup of large fuel loads and minimized the risk of those catastrophic fires. So there's a great book, if you want more information on that, called Tending the Wild by Kat Anderson. It describes how Native Californians manage their natural resources. So a few words here about the wildland-urban interface. Here in Sonoma County, we live mostly in the wildlands. About 75% of our homes are in the wildland-urban interface. And what that means is we've built our homes and associated structures among or adjacent to forests, shrublands, and grasslands. And you have the issue of climate change with the higher temperatures, higher winds, along with fire suppression and this increased development in the wildland, and you get increased fire risk. So, and it's the fact is that lightning does not occur regularly in coastal California. So humans are the source of ignitions. The more people we have, the greater the likelihood of fire. And even though these ignitions are unintentional, they still have the same effect. So there are huge environmental impacts when structures burn, not just the impacts, the devastation to our, our livelihoods in our community and those who are injured by them, but the air and water pollution from released toxins and the tremendous environmental cost of rebuilding can be very problematic to habitat. So we can do ourselves and firefighters a favor by diligently creating and maintaining defensible space. So a few images here to show in the 79 years between 1935 and 2014, there was a patchwork of fires that were, and these are regional fires. We're not talking about small couple acre grass fires. These fires were generally in the range of 2,000 to 10,000 acres. And if you skip to the next, keep that other slide in mind, this is a 5-year period from 2015 to 2020, showing the results of this combination of fire suppression along with climate change and the warmer, drier conditions that happen with intense winds. And so while the low intensity frequent fire was part of the forest's natural cycle, you now have these very large fires that end up changing forests into shrublands and even grasslands sometimes. And I know we've all seen it around the landscape. Now, this is an illustration of the difference from 1964 to 2017. You have the footprint of the Hanley fire, and right, if you follow my cursor here, this is Highway 101, and here's Santa Rosa in the dark red. And then in 2017, the same Highway 101 corridor, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. And the sort of yellow orange shows the low density housing, and you can see how thoroughly it's crept into the footprint of previously the Hanley fire and now the Tubbs fire. So I've already gone over the problems that can come from fires sweeping through the landscape, but there's the added problem that wildlife habitat is fragmented by the building that we're doing in the wildlands. And so many plant and animal species in the entire ecological system has more difficulty thriving. So we actually have an opportunity then to do our gardens in a sustainable way. So Doug Tallamy again writes, for the first time in history, gardeners have become important players in the management of our nation's wildlife. And he even has started you can Google Douglas Tallamy, but he started a website called Homegrown National Park. And if you have an area of natives in your garden, you can join it. And he claims that if enough of us plant natives and have a habitat garden, then we can create landscapes that are larger than all of the national parks put together. So it's an inspiring concept. So how do we create defensible space that's beautiful, sustainable, and biodiverse? And this picture is an example of what it could look like. These are native plants, and there are spaces, even though you can't see them, between the vegetation. Or you could do something like this. So the left-hand slide is if you particularly enjoy Zen gardens, and if you are really concerned about any kind of plants in your landscape. The slide on the right, maybe somebody who really doesn't know what to do and is sort of frozen, doesn't even know where to start. But the right slide would give a firefighter and your neighbor a heart attack because it is incredibly fire prone. The slide on the left, if you were a bird or any sort of wildlife, you would very quickly pass this one over. So what we are promoting, and you'll hear a lot about this in the coming speakers, is the happy medium, where you have habitat and privacy and beauty and sustainability. So your gardens can provide these ecosystem services. So a well-managed landscape can provide shade and cooling, both for water and for the atmosphere. It can support biodiversity. You can clean and manage water. And our own Brock Dahlman coined this phrase, slow it, spread it, sink it, store it. You can enrich soil and hold it in place, and sequester carbon and provide wildlife habitat and forage. And I'll talk a little bit about each one of those. So biodiversity is the web of life above and below ground, all the plants, animals, fungi, microorganisms, and it has been declining alarmingly. And 2017 study in Germany showed that there was a decline of more than 75% in insect biomass from 1989 to 2016 in 63 natural areas. So, you know, there's a lot that human impacts on the landscape are responsible for this in a lot of ways, but we really can make a difference. And I'm going to leave it to Mimi and April to tell you more about that. So we can support biodiversity by choosing native plants. You can still have 20 or 30% of your landscape in your favorite plants. Like I just planted a magnolia in my garden, but it's good to have 70 to 80% for native pollinators. And a lot of people will say, well, you know, I have my lavender outside and I have my rosemary and the bees love it. But there are thousands of, well, there are dozens of species of native bees that some of which you can't even see. And they are not choosing the lavender. They're choosing the species that they evolved with. So the other things you can do are massing the plants, and April will tell you a lot more about that so that birds and other wildlife can find them. Use integrated pest management, so as much as possible avoid using any sort of chemicals, and provide a water source. And just as important as any of those things would be to preserve native oaks. So these oak trees are provide the highest food productivity of literally any plant in our environment. They provide acorns, but also caterpillars. And a quote from the National Wildlife Federation naturalist David Mizewski, who is the author of Attracting Birds, Butterflies, and Other Backyard Wildlife. It takes a family of chickadees, which you see in this picture, between 6,000 and 9,000 caterpillars to raise one brood of babies to fledge. So they love caterpillars because they're packed with nutrients and calories. Insects are good, but caterpillars are better. The left image is not the far left, but the middle image is an oak moth caterpillar, which I know several years ago, they were literally raining out of the oak trees. And they're considered a pest by most people, but they really are an incredible resource for wildlife and birds. And the trees actually do relief in a year that's where there's a heavy quantity of them. Other things that we can do to take care of our oaks is to allow leaf litter to an inch or two where appropriate, because that supports insects, birds, microorganisms, and the roots of the trees. And also just try not to compact them or irrigate them, certainly within the drip line of the tree. So other things that we recommend are utilizing vegetation and mulch to hold soil in place, which protects water quality, and the vegetation that you provide can cool the creeks and suppress invasive species. So, one argument for protecting the soil and keeping the vegetation and, where possible, mulch in place is to keep the soil in place so that it doesn't wash into streams and take care of the fish, and also suppress flammable invasive species like the broom that you see encroaching. This is a doctored photo. So this is the broom, which is happily looking onto this over denuded landscape and ready to infest. Broom is an example of a highly flammable invasive species. So another important garden ecosystem service is sequestering carbon. And this ties in with the previous slide. To sequester carbon efficiently, you've got to have a really good soil microbiome, and you also want trees and shrubs and grasses that are really healthy, and you have healthy trees, shrubs, and grasses if you have healthy soil. This appears to be a complicated diagram, but put simply, plants draw CO2 from the air along with water and nutrients from the soil to produce plant materials both above and below ground. And the carbon is bound up in the plant itself, but it's also added to the soil and roots and other plant parts as they decompose. Climate experts say making use of these vast carbon sinks in the world's soils is essential in drawing down carbon in our atmosphere. And it turns out that soil actually can hold more carbon than all plants and animals above ground. So it is a tremendous resource that could be better utilized. Timing is everything. So when you do your vegetation management, it's important to be aware of when birds are nesting. So they are nesting right now, February through August. So the best time to do any major vegetation management is September through January. But if you need to do it during the nesting season, check to see if there are any nests present, and then avoid that area while the birds are fledging, which can take a few weeks. This is an example of a junco, which a lot of people think that birds just nest up in the trees, but in fact, they nest in the lower canopy of shrubs, and birds like juncos actually nest on the ground, as do our charismatic megafauna, the California quail, our state bird, nests on the ground. So beware while you're doing weed whacking, look around for those nests and try not to disturb them. And this is my last slide. I put it in there, even though it has nothing to do really with defensible space, but has a lot to do with habitat. Light pollution. This oak tree is so gorgeous, and it is totally understandable that the owner would want to highlight it and show it off. But it's very hard for insects to use this tree. While insects aren't adequately studied, it's thought that half of the millions of insect species are nocturnal, and they're unable to locate food or mates when there's artificial lighting. And those active in the daytime may also be disturbed by light at night when they're at rest. And so it's better to just, have motion activated lighting or turn off the lights when you go to sleep. I actually am happy to say that when we gave this presentation a few months later in this community, all of these lights actually had been removed. It wasn't something that I expected, but it's kind of a heartwarming thought that people actually do take action when wildlife depends on it. This is in the upper right-hand corner is a picture of a California firefly. This is the female. The male actually flies, but he finds her by that tiny little light at the end of her abdomen. So I'm going to turn it over to Mimi. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Ellie. Bear with me for a moment as I set up my screen share. Do a little setup here. All right, so welcome everybody. Thank you, Ellie, for that great introduction. Nice to be presenting with you again. As Ellie mentioned, my name is Mimi Enright, and I'm the program coordinator for the UC Master Gardener program of Sonoma County. Founding members of the Resilient Landscapes Coalition when we established I think it was, and hopefully I don't have too many network issues. I apologize. It looks like I'm getting network warnings, so I might go off camera if it continues to be a problem. So tonight I'm going to step you through the types of fire exposures that our homes and properties can be threatened by during wildfires. Briefly touch on plants and plant spacing, and then spend most of the time of the presentation taking you through the recommendations in the defensible space zone, which is the 0 to 100 foot perimeter around our homes and structures on our properties. Hopefully all of you are familiar with the fire triangle. Very basically, fire needs fuel, oxygen, and heat. And the one element of that we can control in helping prepare for future fire events is the fuel aspect of the fire triangle. The next step beyond the fire triangle is the fire behavior triangle. And the aspects that make up fire behavior involve fuel again, weather, and topography. And again, the one component that we can manage and control and trying to be better prepared for future events is that fuel component. Fuel, very basically, is anything that will burn. In our home gardens and landscapes, that can be the vegetation in our landscapes. It can be organic mulch or fencing, roofing on our homes, decks that surround our homes, wood furniture around our homes, arbors, trellises, planter boxes. So we really need to be looking at all of these components of our home landscapes as possible fuel for fires, and being very considerate on where we're placing it and how we're managing it. So there are 3 possible types of fire exposure that can threaten our homes and properties. The first is what's called direct flame contact. And this is showing the path of a fire that's burning through vegetation directly to threaten the home in this depiction on the left. As we're all too familiar with here in Sonoma County, the second fire threat is embers. We experienced this very dramatically and with great loss of structures during the 2017 wildfires complex. And the embers can be born ahead of the firestorm, that direct flame content, especially with high winds during a fire event. And the third type of fire exposure we can experience is called radiant heat. This is depicted in this visual on the far right. Of an adjacent shed or small structure in close proximity to the home. And that radiant heat from that burning structure can then threaten to ignite an adjacent structure to it. So given these 3 types of fire exposures, there are different approaches we can take in our preparedness. So for direct flame contact, classically defensible space recommendations were developed to address that direct flame contact. So you really want to create, avoid having pathways that the fire could move along. You want to reduce the potential for that direct flame contact to your homes or structures. For ember defense, we need to consider both home hardening practices as well as defensible space to help mitigate the threat from ember exposure. And for radiant heat exposure, we want to look at combining home hardening and fuel reduction to address the potential radiant heat exposure. This picture is depicting how embers can behave during a wildfire. In this case, we see a firefighter who's working to put out spot fires that are being generated by embers. And you can see there's vegetation in this, what's called the 0 to 5 foot zone in immediate proximity to the home. And those embers can land in this organic matter and spark a flame to create direct flame content or radiant heat exposure to the house. And it's particularly interesting to note how the embers are moving in enclosed spaces. You can see this little inset area here on the home and how they can tend to swirl within that space. So we need to take into consideration how they can operate in those smaller spaces and how we want to mitigate that risk by reducing any organic matter that we place in that area that could ignite and transmit the fire to the home. Okay, so here are some basic, starting to space basic principles. You want to start at your house. You want to do your home hardening and get your house prepared, and then work out from your house to your landscape. As an ongoing practice, you want to make sure that you're removing all dead or dying plants and branches in your landscape. And we want to do that year round, not just during fire season. You want to make sure you remove any ladder fuels. And I've got a slide that will take you through what a ladder fuel looks like and what practices we need to do to reduce the threat of moving fire from the ground plane up into the crown of trees. And that's why it's incredibly important to remove those ladder fuels. The recommendation is to create islands or groupings of plants. And based on your fire severity zone that you're living in, potentially separating those by non-combustible paths. But we'll go into that in some more detail when I go through the 3 defensible space zones. As we looked at that ember exposure threat, you want to avoid planting or mulching close to structures. And ongoing maintenance is essential. It's not you do all the work and you're done. We all know that we need to be doing continual maintenance on our home landscapes on an annual basis to be better prepared for future wildfires. Okay, let's talk about spacing guidelines. And there's 2 types of spacing guidelines that involve horizontal spacing between plants and vertical spacing. So let's talk about horizontal spacing guidelines first. So you want to apply horizontal spacing guidelines to individual or groupings of plants. And the recommendation between your groupings of plants is 2 times the height of the outside shrub or plant material in these plant groupings. So if these outside shrub materials are, say, 2 feet in height, then you want to have 4 feet in height separation between these plant groupings. So that's for a less than 20% slope. The spacing that's recommended is then increased based on the increased degree of the slope. So you can see how that increases if you have a 21 to 40% slope, that you want 4 times the height of the outer shrubs in spacing between these plant groupings, and that at a 41% or greater slope degree, you want 6 times. We have had recommendations from firefighters that they do think it's acceptable to have low ground covers or grasses that you would then keep mowed during fire season, that would be acceptable between these horizontal plant groupings. So this is the same depiction of horizontal spacing. We're now introducing spacing recommendations from firefighters between trees. So on a property with a less than 20% degree slope, the recommendation is to have the crowns of your trees separated by 10 feet. And of course, again, that spacing increases based on the increasing degree of slope on your property. So this visual is depicting vertical spacing. Here we can start talking about those ladder fuels. The recommendation is for limbing up any tree in your home landscape 6 feet from the ground. So you want to have 6 feet of separation from the ground plane to your lowest tree limbs. If you have any shrubs or ground covers underneath your trees, the recommendation is that you have spacing from the top of that shrub or ground cover or shrub 3 times the height of that to the lowest tree limb. So say you had a 3-foot shrub underneath this tree, then the recommendation is that you would then have 9 feet of spacing from the top of that shrub to the lowest tree limbs. And then here's the depiction of ladder fuels, right? So we want to avoid having plant materials, shrubs massed under trees that will directly transfer that flame up into the crown of the trees and spread the fire more significantly on the property. So that's why it's so critically important that we remove any shrubs below trees or make sure that we have this 3 times the height of that shrub or ground cover spacing. So many people often ask us for a plant list of tell me what I can plant that's fire resistant and then I'm done. It's really important to recognize that all plants can burn. So the University of California does not recommend the use of plant lists. It's more important to consider where you place the plant in your landscape and then how you're maintaining it on an ongoing basis. So again, want to stress how incredibly important it is. Landscaping requires ongoing maintenance in our home gardens. If you want to look at plant selection, you can look at selecting lower growing, more open structured or less resinous plants and higher moisture content plants, such as succulents. But again, even those can burn. So it's again, more important to consider what plants you're picking and whether it's appropriate to place it in the spacing of where you're putting it in your home garden, and then whether you're willing to do the maintenance that it's going to require to maintain it. Okay, let's dive into the 3 defensible space zones. So the first defensible space zone, which is more newly introduced into the defensible space recommendations, is called Zone 0, also known as the non-combustible zone, right? So this is a really critically important zone for us to implement, especially if you're in a higher fire severity area in defense of embers. So you want to create this perimeter around your home, and that includes any attached decks and outlying structures, which is unfortunately not well depicted with this outlying, well, at least it seems to be showing gravel around this little outlying shed, but it doesn't show the 0 to 5 specifically. So zone 0 is the 0 to 5 perimeter around your structures and attached decks. Zone 1, called the intermediate zone, is the 5 to 30 foot zone around your structures. And then zone 2, or the extended zone, is the 30 feet to 100 foot zone. And we're going to go into much more detail on the recommendations for each of these distinct zones. Okay, so zone 0 is, again, a really critical component for structure defense. Again, you want to start off with hardening your home and then moving into implementing your defensible space zones. And when you couple zone 0 with zones 1 and 2, it's essential to successful creation of defensible space for your properties. So the recommendation in zone 0, optimally, you would eliminate any plants or flammable materials in zone 0. If you absolutely have to have plants in this zone, which I would not suggest if you were in a higher fire severity zone. But if you want to include some plants in this zone, the recommendation is to use low perennial or succulent plants. And if you remember that depiction of the embers with the firefighter, the picture of that from the LA Times, and the fire swirling in those corners, in particular, you don't want to have plants. If you're going to include any plants, absolutely don't include plants in any corners like that or under windows. Under windows, if a plant ignites from embers or radiant heat, it can then break through the glass of the window and fire can enter the house through that broken glass. So the recommendation is ideally to use only inorganic and non-combustible materials in your 0 to 5 foot zone. So it makes it a great zone for implementing hardscape like patios or walkways. And you can see this beautiful depiction from one of April's design projects of how creative you can get with use of some different materials to create something that's a little more interesting, but it could be as simple as concrete. Again, maintenance is essential. You want to make sure that you're cleaning up any clutter and leaf debris that falls in your zone 0, the zone that's the 0 to 5 foot perimeter on your homes and structures regularly. And you want to be especially vigilant about that during fire season. Trees are okay in zone 0, but it's recommended that you keep a clearance of at least 5 feet from your roof. It can help you prevent hopefully having to continually maintaining any leaf drop from your roof or gutters, but you will need to be making sure you're keeping an eye on that if you have trees in proximity and over your roof. And then it is a Sonoma County Code requirement to keep tree limbs 10 feet from chimneys or stovepipe outlets. Okay, let's move on to zone 1. So implementation of zone 1 helps reduce the likelihood of fire burning directly to your structure. It's also important to note that if you're lucky enough to have firefighters during a wildfire working to defend your home, that this is often the zone and the defensible space zone where they'll be staging their defense. So you want to keep in mind ease of access for firefighters in the 5 to 30 foot zone. So the recommendation in your 5 to 30 foot zone is again to plant in those islands of plantings that are separated by pathways to break up the path of fire moving towards your home and structures. You can use mulch in this 5 to 30 foot zone as your pathway separator, and you can use mulch on your islands of plantings. If you're in a higher fire severity zone, you might want to consider making those pathways between these islands of plantings in an inorganic material such as gravel or decomposed granite. The recommendation is also for your plantings in this zone 1, this 5 to 30 foot zone, to mostly be focused on small shrubs and perennials that are 3 feet in height or less. It is okay to use like a specimen or individual shrub or tree in this zone as well. But again, if you do incorporate a shrub or a tree into zone 1, you want to make sure you're being really vigilant that that they're being well maintained, right? You're keeping them in optimal health with regular irrigation, that you're pruning out any dead wood, you're keeping them limbed up the 6 feet from the ground plane. We really want to stress that it is okay to have trees in the proximity to the house, but you really want to make sure you're maintaining those very well. Okay, let's move on to zone 2. So zone 2 actions are designed to reduce the potential behavior of an oncoming fire in such a way that it will drop it from any approaching fire from the crown of trees down to the ground level. And again, if you've got that separation by pathways in your groupings of plants, that also helps slow the spread of the fire. So in zone 30 to 100 foot zone around your structures, you want to maintain your focus on horizontal and vertical spacing. Larger plants and groupings are increasingly appropriate. Again, keeping those separated with some pathways to break up the pathway or flow of potential fire to your property. And it is a county code requirement to mow any annual grasses to 4 inches in height. So it's also very important that you don't have wood fences or gates attached to your home. that can create another direct line of path for fire to threaten your home or structure. This picture shows where we've got a wood fence that had a wood mulch at its base. You can see that the wood mulch ignited and lit the fence on fire. But because there was a metal gate and they had a zone 0 implementation with this rock gravel and this concrete on this other side, it stopped the transmission of the fire and the flame from going directly to the house. So mulch is an incredibly important component of helping with managing soil temperature and water conservation in our home landscapes and helping with weed management. It's important not to use mulch in a widespread or continuous manner. This picture is actually showing a glamour don't of what to do in your home landscape with mulch application. This is a shredded bark mulch, which is not recommended for use in home landscapes. Often what can happen if embers fall into this shredded bark mulch, they can smolder. If firefighters have been staged defending your property and they leave to move on to defend other homes from the threat of fire, the embers smoldering in the shredded bark mulch could ignite and the fire could start up again. So the current recommendations from a research study that was conducted in 2009 are to use larger size composted arbor mulch. And again, want to stress, you don't want to use any organic mulch as its fuel in your 0 to 5 foot zone around your house. There is a new mulch study that's being conducted by a colleague of ours in Marin County. We're very excited to have a more current study than the only study we've had to rely on from 2009. We hope to have those study results sometime this year. And we'll, of course, be sharing those, the results of that study on our website for you all to explore. So again, ongoing maintenance is incredibly important for us in our fire preparedness. You want to make sure that you're removing any dead or dying branches from trees and shrubs. You want to, again, mow any annual grasses and weeds to 4 inches tall before fire season. And you want to make sure you prune out any dead material from the interior of shrubs. So that's what can make often like a sheared shrub more flammable, is that it creates a buildup of dead branches and leaves on the interior of the shrub, which you can't really see from the green exterior. So you want to make sure that you're not shearing your shrubs because it creates that effect. You want to make sure you're pruning out any dead material from the interior shrubs on a regular basis. Again, you want to remove any ladder fuels, so to prevent the flow of the fire up into the crown of trees. And you want to be thinning and reducing your tree canopies on probably a multi-year basis. Every maybe 2 or 3 years, revisit thinning out the tree canopies on your property. It's also very important to consider access in and out of your property for both your evacuation, if you need to evacuate from a fire, or for firefighters to be able to access your property during a fire event. You need to make sure you're maintaining vegetation at least 10 feet edge of the road and 15 feet vertically. And optimally, you've got 12 feet of unobstructed pavement for passage of vehicles. So just to recap, in our zone 0, our 0 to 5 foot zone around the perimeters of your house, eliminate or minimize vegetation, optimally implementing some hardscape. In zone 1, you want to have islands of plantings, optimally 3 feet in height or less, with some individual or specimen trees or shrubs. And then in your zone 2, your 30 to 100 feet around perimeter around your structures, you can do larger plant groupings, again, separated by pathways to break up the flow or path of fire from coming and threatening your homes and structures. So with that, I'm going to close out and turn it over to my colleague, our colleague, April Owens, who's going to take you through some application of these principles of what both Ellie and I have been talking about, with some really lovely pictures of how this can look in your home landscapes. So over to you, April.
Thank you, Mimi. Of course, my dog starts barking. I'm going to share my screen. And start my slideshow. How does that look, Mimi?
It was good for a minute, but now it's
Oh, okay,
not
I need the
present
full
mode.
screen. Okay,
There you go. Perfect.
great. So thank you all. It's so fun to be back. I haven't done one of these workshops in a while, so I'm a little rusty. And please, keep propagating the question and answer, and we will make sure to wrap up in time. I'll be done about 7:45 probably, and we'll have time to have 15 minutes of questions answered. So I am the executive director of the Habitat Corridor Project. I'm also a landscape designer and trained as a landscape architect, and do both private and public projects all over California. And the Habitat Corridor Project, our mission is to create and promote California native plant restoration gardens in the urban environment. So we really study and practice building native plant gardens and now resilient gardens in many public spaces and in many residential landscapes and gardens. We've really expanded since, like Ellie said, the first time we did our workshops up at Bennett Ridge, we ended up with a lot of clients up there under rebuilds. And so we had the opportunity to create a lot of resilient landscapes and really utilize and play with these principles. So I can offer some examples and of what we've done. So resilient landscapes, as Ellie talked about, and Mimi as well, it's really working in California for the past 30 plus years. California is a complex place, and we need to think about what brings this beauty to California, but also knowing that we can't just depend on one idea in the landscape. So a drought comes and we all take out our landscapes and put our lawns and put in rock, and then it starts raining again, and we put the lawns back in. So we really need to think of our landscapes in California in a complex vision, with them being fire-wise, with defensible space. They need to conserve water, they need to be sustainable, and they need to be biodiverse, using California native plants and some non-native plants, but really adding to the biodiversity of our state. And our landscapes, as Ellie was talking about, have an amazing impact on the environment. And I have been so joyous to watch these gardens go in and see. This was a swallowtail butterfly at our Center for the Arts garden in Sebastopol. And if you build it, they will come for sure. And why use native plants? Usually if in person, I would want to hear from you all about how you use native plants. And if you want to put in the chat your experiences with native plants and your stories, we'd love to read them and hear about it. I use native plants, and we do as a company, because they're adapted to our climate, and they're adapted to our water cycle, our summer dry climate. They're adapted to our soils, and they support the native fauna, including pollinators. And they're just pretty beautiful as well. So the native pollinators will use non-native plants, but they prefer, and it's been proven scientifically, that they get more food and benefit out of native plants. Mimi lovely went over all of this defensible space zone. I'm just simplifying it a little bit for us all. So if you look at this graphic by the Sonoma Ecology Center and John that used to work there, zone 0 is that 5 feet out from the structure. And that's a place where you can have it's preferable to have no plants, and you can have swales, rock gardens, pathways. There's so many opportunities in that space that I think a lot of us thought that we couldn't create gardens with no plants up against the building. And I think we are really pushing that now. And in my experience in the last 5 years, a lot of landscape designers and architects are embracing this new look, and architects are needing to really like look at their design as well for foundation plantings. So one is the 5 to 30. And we have islands of plants, like Mimi said, with some shrubs, or it's nice to have a few larger plants in those islands of lower plants because of habitat. So you can have a high impact toyon, or we'll talk about some shrubs that have really high impact on biodiversity in those plantings with a lot of really well maintained lower plants. And then the zone 2, the 30 to 100, you have larger islands and more shrubs. And more of these cover is really important for habitat. So I know we've been talking a lot about fire, and I do talk more in my talk about habitat and bringing that in as well as being fire resilient. So the zone 0 and the 0 to 5, you can have these patios and pathways. You can use decorative rock. These are some examples. Mimi showed kind of the bigger view of this landscape. I'm showing that you know there's a concrete step. We have some well-maintained plants in that 0 to 5, and as well as some Trinity pebble, and then this lower image has another mix of Noyo cobble mix. So there's if you go to the materials yard and walk around and kind of get creative, there's a lot of ways to create beauty in this zone. What I use instead of and I'm going to give you a few little tips, but what I use under these pretty rocks, we call them, is compacted base rock instead of landscape fabric, because landscape fabric really strips the soil and you're leaving that for the future owner or user of your landscape. So I find that that's a better way to create these landscapes. Here's a nice image of Trinity crushed rock and some low growing sages with a nicely pruned up mallow. So you can see that you can have some larger plants for birds, but also you have this clean landscape. This home could be hardened better with a tighter grid under that deck, but we're not really going to hardening, but there's a lot of tips that you can learn from there. Just another example of some beautiful pebble with a Nomo fescue and a steel edging. Again, this is at Ellie's home, replacing any material against the house with some nice crushed. This was just a 1 1/8 inch just crushed material to make that a space, and then a lot of patio space. More patio space with crushed gravel, and then you have your luscious landscape with native plants out into the next zone. Walls can count as that space in between the plantings, so like a 3-foot wall with plantings. This is a Delta bluegrass fescue, native fescue turf that you can lay down that's lower water use, and if it's hydrated in the summer, can be used as in the 0 to 5 zone. Again, you want to make sure that, I'm sorry, I'm just going to check because there's some text going on. Oh, okay. You want to make sure there's lovely options for fencing in the 0 to 5. That's one of the more important. Hardening your home and replacing the fencing that goes up to your house with metal fencing is very important in this zone. Fire just travels along these fences. It's been shown in the studies of all fires across all of California. California native trees in the 0 to 5 zone, they're really important to habitat, important for energy savings. This is a coast live oaks are very important for habitat. You just need vigilant maintenance in the fire season. I think this is an interesting photo, even though this is in Healdsburg and in a parking lot, but showing the metal roof. So you really have to decide to have your trees around your buildings, and this one would need to be shored up about 6 feet from the top of the building. But I just think it's a lovely image of how important it is to try to keep your trees. So zone 1, 5 to 30 from the home. I'm just going to show you some examples. This is a drain rock path, a very inexpensive option for a pathway, breaking up in some walls and then some vibrant plantings that are well maintained. So this is Sonoma sage, a lovely go-to in Sonoma County. Boulders. It doesn't have to be an expensive solution, like I said, with the drain rock, but just getting the natives in, then you get that like level of biodiversity, but also the beauty of this and creating those larger islands. And you can have long islands in the 5 to 30. A lot of people think that islands are just round or you can only have little round, but I think of them as like, this is a 3 foot by 10 foot island of low growing plants that are well maintained. Between the islands, preferably we'd see rock or gravel or crushed rock or paving or flagstone paths. This middle image is a nice little island with a pebble up against the house. Another thing to think about is that a lot of these are rebuilds, so they were built with fire resistant materials and completely hardened, and so you can be a little less worried about that if depending on how hardened your home is. Another, again, with the native bent grass or bunch grass turf, as long as you keep it hydrated. You know, hydration is the most important thing. Native plants are more easily hydrated, and so they're easier to maintain. So you're using less water to have a fire-wise landscape, but like Mimi said, there are no fire-safe plants, and we really want to make sure to discourage anyone from thinking that that's true. There's a lot of wonderful flowering perennials in the native plant palette. Here's just a few. Verbena de la Mina is wonderful for the butterflies. Epilobium canum, California fuchsia comes in low growing ground cover type or in larger size. The hummingbirds love it in the late summer, so you can have seasonal. Oftentimes people think you don't have color in the native plant garden, but you have a lot of color if you plan well for the seasons. This slide I usually put in the 5 to 30 to 100, but I just want to remind people that there are wonderful there's an opportunity in the 5 to 30 to have some specimen shrubs in your landscape, and here are some super wonderful ones. You can even, like manzanita, McMinn manzanita, surrounded by some lower growing plants, as long as you prune it up nicely. The native sages, the native monkey flowers, the native, I'm sure you've all seen the flowering, the California lilac blooming like crazy right now, coffee berry. So this is, you'll get the slides for this, but this is a combination that I use a lot in landscapes all over the county. And it's just, it's one of my go-to palettes for plants. And you can bring this up into your 5 to 30 as long as you keep it maintained and use less shrubs in that space. Again, big habitat value. There's some plant communities or genera of species of plants that are really high value for native pollinators and flora and fauna, but they come in all the different sizes. So you really want to understand that there are cultivars and species at the nursery. So make sure you read the cards, because that right plant, right place that Mimi was talking about is really important, because native buckwheats can come in a ground cover and a giant shrub, and same with California fuchsia. So you just need to understand what your garden needs and what zone you're in, and then read about the plant and understand the plant you're putting in and how big it is. And I have been infamous for overplanting and planting too close together. It's super important to give these plants their space so you don't have to worry about maintaining them in such a drastic fashion. So design in the 30 to 100 is more habitat and larger islands. And these are just examples of sizes of islands. The science isn't really there yet behind the exact size of islands, but just an example of a larger island, like in the 5 to 30, it's maybe 5 foot wide and long, or 5 foot wide and 10 feet. This, I go like 6 feet wide, maybe 15 feet, in this larger island, but make sure that there's at least 4 feet between the islands. And I recommend that you have pathways in the space still, but you can also have mulch pathways in the 30 to 100 space. So that saves you money having that space between the islands. And in this is where I've gotten away from using bunch grasses in the 5 to 30, but in 30 to 100, just because they need so much maintenance. But in the 30 to 100, you can do beautiful bunch grasses, bigger shrubs, bigger groupings of shrubs. In this picture is monkey flower and buckwheat and lovely grasses and some epilobium and sages. So you can have this wonderful space and garden in that zone. Again, islands separated by rock walls. I think we don't often think about walls as space. So a 4-foot pathway can be translated to a 4-foot wall or a 3-foot wall. So these are walls separating these nice islands of beautiful sages and solidago and deer grass and beauty in one of our rebuilds. This garden actually was burnt in the 2017 fire. The house didn't burn down, but the fire whipped through here. This is a really nice example also of limbing up your trees in your 0 to 5. These trees are right in the 0 to 5, but they've been limbed up safely. So just really thinking of that overview of your landscape. Again, between the masses of plants, here's where, like I said, you can have the arbor mulch. So we use composted arbor mulch as a dressing for the planting areas, but as well as pathways in this zone. And then gravel and crushed rock or well-maintained ground cover or grasses. And if you have to, in a big landscape, you just mow down your non-native grasses in this zone as well. Oftentimes, we can't get rid of them all, but you can do islands of plantings and then mow down your non-native grasses to 4 inches or less, like Mimi said for code. Some of our California native shrubs that I just wanted to point out quickly. Toyon is a wonderful benefit to all habitat and also a gorgeous shrub that survived the fires really well. So it takes hard pruning very easily and has these wonderful, it's called Christmas berry is one of its common names. So you can make wreaths out of it in the winter, in Christmas time or in the winter holidays. And it's one of those great shrubs that one of the keys to maintenance, this isn't a maintenance workshop, you'll have to join one of our maintenance workshops, but one of the keys to having a fire wise-ish plant is to keep it maintained. And so Toyon can be cut down to the ground and fluffs back out really easily with low water and provides a lot of cover for habitat. This is one of my favorites, the California coffeeberry. Again, with cultivars versus selections and selections versus straight species, the selection Mound San Bruno is just a really tidy, garden tolerant plant that it's a go-to for me in my native landscapes in my design. A key to having a beautiful native garden is to have a lot of foundation. So when the garden is kind of in its low, like late winter, late summer, you have this green, beautiful plant to hold the landscape. California lilac, like I mentioned before, this is the Center for the Arts. If you're in locally and you want to have a nice little visit, it's right downtown Sebastopol. If you look at our website, habitatcorridorproject.org, it has a list of all of our demonstration gardens just to go check out. And we also have a newsletter to sign up for if you want to know about work days in the garden or tours. Ellie talked about the live oaks, our keystone tree in California. This was up at Bennett Ridge after the fires, and somebody had done a sculpture out of a tree that died, but these trees survived the fires. Buckeyes are another go-to for me. They've always been a favorite of mine. They just show such seasonality in California that we don't necessarily have. So I kind of structure my year by the buckeyes. And when the buckeyes go to sleep at the end of the summer, they just kind of, it gets hot, they just fry up and go just like lose all their leaves. And it's like, that's time for a hammock. and a rest in the garden. And then they come back right about now and they're blooming and they're just amazing for habitat. Hydrating plants is a complicated subject, but we often use this grid of drip. So drip, you don't really want to use the drip little emitters going to each plant. It's more, it's better for the soil and for the plants if you do some kind of way to hydrate the whole landscape and the soils. It does bring more weeds at first, but if you use mulch, you're good. And keep up on the weeds. And then Hunter MP rotators or low water use. Overhead watering, even hand watering, is what the plants really have adapted to and what they appreciate the most. Thinking about sustainability, keeping water on site with swales, slow it, spread it, sink it. Think about your landscape as a place to keep the water on site versus running it off. Rain gardens are lovely because you can see the water after it rains, which we don't get. Like the last couple of years, we've gotten good rain, but I'm sure, there'll be times when we don't have that. So I love rain gardens for that. And then finally, just some tips for successful habitat planting. Ellie touched on this, but you really want many types of flowers. You want like large groupings of pollen, like we call them pollinator targets. So less is more, kind of like big groupings of plants. If you're not going to have like 50 different, like one of each plant, like maybe think of 20 groupings of plants or 10 groupings of plants. It also is just a great design tip. You want flowering at different times and plants that provide both nectar and pollen sources. We have a list of links here. So calscape.org is a wonderful resource and it's getting revamped. Calscape 2.0 is coming out in a matter of days. And that's a great place to go to learn about plants. You can put in your zip code, you can put in when your garden is, and it'll pop up a bunch of plants that are local to your landscape. And also you can link to where the nursery where you can get them. Livinglearninglandscapes.org is a project in Santa Rosa JC that I did with Mimi and the UC Master Gardeners, where we have some free landscapes that you can look at online, look at the plans, you can go visit them on the campus, or you can just download the plans. They're kind of a go-to list of plants, and then some other wonderful websites to visit. And I just appreciate your time. And it looks like now we're going to turn over to question and answer, and everybody's going to join me. And I just appreciate you all coming out on this Tuesday. What day is it? Tuesday evening. And it looks like Roberta's here too. Yay.
We called in Roberta because there's some questions that I thought
Yay.
would be best. I do want to start by saying that it is true that it's been noted in a couple of places that we're showing a lot of images outside of the type of landscape that many people have in their redwood canyons.
Yes.
But we have mentioned a number of times that calscape.org is a great resource for, I just typed in Occidental California, looked at perennials, and there's 55 plants that can be planted.
There's so many amazing options. Yeah.
I want to say too, I work primarily in the Occidental Community Services District in Camp Meeker, and the top topography here is very varied. You can go from the Redwood Canyon or even redwood. I have redwood on my ridge. And then you have grassland right next to it. Or you have I have oaks as well as, so I have a mixed forest of redwood and oaks. So all of us have our immediate topography, and then there's a larger topography. And so we're blessed in Sonoma County to have such varied topography.
Yeah.
So there's some answers to some of the questions that you have about redwoods and what to do with redwoods. Like in particular, I can answer right now, you can't get 10 feet between your redwoods. The redwoods, but you can limb up, and that's the important part. And in any other trees, what you want to do is you want to have 10 feet between those trees if you can do it. Create the trees.
It's groupings of trees. It's really important that you keep your groupings of trees and then you have some space in between them.
Exactly. But when you think about Camp Meeker is blessed. Camp Meeker, it's a very difficult place to have any space from trees. but it is changing. The trees themselves are changing it because the old Doug fir are falling. And as we recover from the lumbering that was done here, as we get out of that 100-year cycle and the last 50 years where we haven't really done the heavy timbering out here, then our landscape will start to transition and change and grow back. And that's what we're working towards, is to grow it to be resilient going forward. We know we're dealing with the changes that happen with climate change, and that will affect all of the native plants all over the earth. We will all deal with it as we can. What we'll do in West County is continue to plant as many native plants as we can, try and keep them alive, move them north, and move in some of the southern ones as the climate changes. But it's an evolving thing, and we will evolve with it.
And a
so
real
will
asset
others.
of living under the trees in the shade is that you can utilize a lot of native plants that really like more moisture, and they are much more fire wise and really appreciate that. So there's a lot more plant palette that's safe for you in that understory in the shade that doesn't need as much water because you are in the shade. So you really have a lot of plants to access. And I encourage everyone to go visit California Flora Nursery in Fulton. They have a wonderful selection of plants for the redwood understory and for shade areas as well.
I also
What
wanted to
that
respond to
we
the question
need-
about the redwood whips and the redwood duff. And I'm going to talk about it from my perspective, which is fire resilience, but I would really like those of you that work with the plants to respond to that too. My response is that when this land was managed by the original settlers, it was regularly burned, and that includes the redwoods. And you can see that scarring on a lot of trees, but it is just scarring, and they did just fine. When you do a controlled burn in a larger landscape setting, it helps to pull the mountains of duff that have accumulated away from the tree so that it doesn't burn hot right next to the base of the tree. That's because all that duff has accumulated all these years. So if we can pull the duff away from those trees and burn it, it actually helps the cycle of the native plants, a lot of plants that we don't see anymore because they don't burn, etc. The other thing about the whips is, in my experience, the whips under my redwoods have been being cut for the last 40 years, and the redwoods are just fine, but I would love input on that.
So I don't have any specific experience with the whips, but I will say that the duff provides a really important ecological function for the health of the trees. Absolutely keep it cleared out of your 0 to 5 foot zone. Right? That's your bare minimum, right? We don't say that you can't have organic matter, as a mulch. I shouldn't do a double negative. We say it's okay to have organic matter as a mulch in the 5 to 30 foot zone. But I think the recommendations you made of not letting it get like super dense, to keep it managed maybe to a couple of inches, I think is the better practice. I don't know, Ellie and April, what would you add? And do you have any experience with the whips? I don't have any experience specifically with the whips on redwoods.
My experience is as Elizabeth's, to keep them pruned, because so I think it's totally fine to put the energy back into the tree. And then, but I would really want to reinforce what you said about keeping the duff away from the close base of the tree, and keep the lower branches pruned up so that if anything is burning on the ground, it won't climb into the tree. So yeah, just reinforce.
I just want to give one positive of having that leaving that 2 inches of duff outside the 0 to 5, is that at our landscapes at the Jana Rosa JC, it's a really hard plant community to reestablish, the redwood plant community, and it's been wonderful. We've been leaving that 2 inches and planted in the master gardeners planted the redwood sorrel and some other native trillium and other things, and they're actually like starting to create this ecosystem again. So clearing out that redwood duff really does detriment to your plants as well. So it's like that balance of leaving some of it there.
2 inches is really different than 1.5 feet.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
A lot of trees are
Dramatically.
1.5 feet, and that's just a reality. And the other thing is that I have seen houses, I have witnessed houses here that have redwood siding going down and 4 inches of duff above the redwood siding. That's bad for the house. It's bad for the everything.
Yeah,
It's not a good thing. So
yeah.
Yeah, I had one thing to add on that. I know I've heard of some people around the county using sprays, chemicals, other things to manage whips, as you call them, or the resprouts. I would just highly recommend manual removal, and generally that doesn't do any detriment to the tree itself. A lot of times, what we think of as the tree is just the external show, whereas a lot of the underground roots can live for, I've heard redwoods can be up to 15,000 years old. So they're going to keep resprouting, especially if you already have trees that are showing up top. Yeah, cut the resprouts, they'll be just fine.
Let's, can we go to the, I'm just kind of going from the top down. We've got the specific to decks connected to the house, and Roberta, you're here. We have significant amount of square footage of outdoor wooden decks. What's the best message for fire safety? And then an associated one about lattice around decks. If you, can you address that, Roberta or Elizabeth?
Yeah, certainly. I have a wraparound deck myself. And in my opinion, the best thing to do is just keep it clear underneath. Have no combustibles underneath it. It's as simple as that. Hardscape, gravel, keep it maintained to mineral earth. You know, put a cement slab under there. Just don't have anything combustible underneath that deck, because that's inviting issues, maintenance issues, and of course, fire issues should embers land on any combustible material underneath that deck.
And we had a great question at a workshop, a live workshop we did a couple weeks ago in Upper Mark West, about someone who was on a slope with a deck, and the insurance company was requiring no plant materials, no wood mulch, right? Full implementation of the 0 to 5 around the deck perimeter. And someone was like, how do I manage that from a weed management perspective and implement a zone 0? And there was a great suggestion from the audience of using some larger rocks to hold the gravel in of the 0 to 5. So I think there's, I think we can group source creativity
Yeah,
for
and
great
if-
solutions on how we can all move forward effectively with this,
If-
especially with insurance company requirements.
If
yeah,
that's
and
who I
speaking
think
of
it is,
insurance
she
company
actually,
requirements and all of the, I'm sorry, Roberta.
if that's who I think it is, she actually did that, and I saw what she was doing.
Nice.
And yeah, because it's sloped, she had to basically terrace it to get the gravel to stay in place. So what she did
Yeah.
is she made some non-combustible tiny retaining walls to hold the gravel in stages, and more or less put gravel terracing all the way up, underneath there.
So if you live in Forestville, Monterey, Camp Meeker, or Occidental, there's a rebate that is now available at saferwestcounty.org under the grants, where you can get 2/3 of the cost of your defensible space work done, up to a limit of $1,000. And we do have some matching grants if people need that. So please do look at the information at saferwestcounty.org about that rebate, those rebates. This is work that we can all do during rainy season. We can do it during fire season. We can get it done so that our properties are more defensible, and maybe we can keep our insurance. So
Can we drop that in the chat?
I'm sorry,
Can we drop that link in the chat? I'm gonna drop.
I did already.
Yeah, this
Okay.
is the second time. You
Thank
probably, it's better to put it in more than once, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's saferwestcounty.org.
Elizabeth, we're going to recruit you as a Resilient Landscapes Coalition member. You're highly effective.
Okay, I'm totally on board. I think it's,
We're going to have you come do more workshops with us, Elizabeth.
sounds wonderful. I'd love to.
Do we want to talk a little bit about lattice? There's also a question about lemon trees, but I think that's a home hardening question, the airflow and what to do with lattice.
So was the lattice like under a deck, or was it lattice against a house? So if
It
it's
sounds
lattice
like-
against, was it under decks?
Under decks and the question is about aeration. So getting airflow under there. There was a great picture in both your presentations that had both April's and Mimi's that had a stairway that had wire, it was the hog wire, so big squares like this underneath it. That would be fine if it's backed by 1/8 mesh, which would keep embers out from underneath that property. So that
Exactly. You're
that's
like,
what-
you're
that,
right on
that was a
this stuff,
beautiful
Elizabeth.
picture. It just needs a little caption that says backed by 1/8 mesh.
Yeah, you're
Yeah,
absolutely
well,
right. And,
that's-
and April highlighted that.
And-
It was
and
from,
that- And that's if you're gonna store combustibles underneath there.
yeah,
If you're
And
keeping
that, and I
it
have to say
one-
that deck had like just drain rock under the deck.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if
so-
you're talking about wood lattice, that's a big no-no, period.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because anything, if you're in the WUI, according to code, anything less than the thickness of a 2x4, anything less than 1/2 inch and a half in exposed wooden combustible material, painted or not, is not allowed. So 3/8 inch lattice, 3/8 inch by 2 inch lattice is not allowed. And if I understood you correctly, it sounds like what you might have been talking about is having wood lattice with screen behind it. Okay, good, because.
Yeah,
it
no, we're
would
talking
have
about
that.
wire mesh, like the hog wire with the big 4-inch squares.
Okay, well,
Put
yeah.
1/8 mesh behind that if you want to store anything flammable.
Yeah, if you want to keep the embers out. Yeah,
Yeah,
remember
mine
that.
has the hard gravel all compacted nicely in there.
Yeah, mine's
Okay,
either gravel or
guys.
mineral or.
We have a note from our interpreter saying, please don't, I think we're outpacing our interpreter. Do you want, give her a second to,
I think we're just speaking over each other, Ellie.
that too?
I forgot we were doing interpretation.
Do we have
Uh,
time for one last question before we wrap at 8? Or anything you want to wrap with, Elizabeth?
There's the lemon tree growing against a
There's
south
a
wall.
lemon tree. Yeah, the lemon tree is an issue. I would suggest planting another lemon tree further away from your wall, especially if that's the wall of your house. And when that lemon tree gets to be a decent size, cut down the other one. I'm doing that with a maple that I can't stand to cut down right now. So I would suggest that. The other thing that I would say is join your local fire resilience organization. Local is good because they know your issues, they know where you are. So Fire Safe Camp Meeker, Fire Safe Rio Neto, Fire Safe Guerneville, all of those areas in all those localities in West County have fire resilience organizations. Your neighborhoods should be getting organized. Start a Firewise group. And work on this stuff together. It's a lot more fun to do defensible space when you do it with your neighbors.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Yeah, and if you don't know where that is, on Fire Safe Sonoma's website, we have a pretty decent interactive map that will show you where all those organizations are. And most of them have their current contact information.
And there's a ton of other information. So look at Fire Safe Sonoma's website.
So are we at a wrap? Do you want to wrap this up, Elizabeth, or any closing comments anybody wants to make?
I would like to say thank you very much for the hard work that the Resilient Landscapes Coalition is doing to show us what we can do and how we can make our homes both beautiful and defensible.
And thanks for the work you're leading with community out in Safer West County as well, and West County in general. Elizabeth, it's equally as important that all our community members are actively engaged in the work you guys are doing. So thank you right back.
Us tonight.
Yeah, thank you everybody for joining us tonight.
Thanks a lot, everyone. Be
Thanks,
safe.
everybody.
Yep.